So, we're going to dive into something kind of counterintuitive today, a really fascinating principle of power. In a world that just never stops talking, it turns out that real control, true power, often comes from strategic silence. And to really get why, we're going to start with a pretty stark warning from one of history's greatest minds. Yeah, this is from Leonardo da Vinci, more than 500 years ago. Think about that image. He's saying that when you talk too much, you're basically at the mercy of whoever's listening. You're as vulnerable as an open oyster just waiting for a crab to come along and trap you. It is such a stark warning, right? And it's a really powerful image to keep in your head as we dig into why this is a fundamental law of power. Okay, so what's the actual logic behind this law? Well, it all starts with a really simple but powerful idea about how we see other people. So here it is, the law itself. Basically, when you're trying to impress people with your words, the more you say, the more ordinary you end up looking, and the less in control you seem. It's a total paradox, isn't it? Your words could be totally mundane, but your silence, that can make you seem profound, all because people are forced to imagine what you're holding back. And this is where the real juice is. Silence isn't just about not making a mistake. It's an active move. It can actually be intimidating. It makes other people uncomfortable, and they feel this need to fill the void. So what do? They start talking. They start revealing their own cards. And in that nervous chatter, they often end up projecting all this power and intelligence onto you, stuff you might not even have. All right, to really see how this plays out in the real world, or actually how it can spectacularly fail, we've got to look at the tragic story of Coriolanus. He was this legendary Roman hero whose biggest enemy, it turns out, was his own mouth. I mean, the speed of his downfall is just staggering. Coriolanus was a total legend. His battle scars literally spoke for him, and the people loved him for it. But the second he tried to use his own words to gain power, everything just fell apart. With every single speech, he just showed more and more arrogance, more contempt. He turned his fans into enemies until one last, incredibly insulting rant cost him absolutely everything. It was his words that got him exiled, not his enemies. And this really sums it up perfectly, doesn't it? The lesson of his whole life. His downfall had nothing to do with what he did on the battlefield. It was all about his complete lack of control over what came out of his mouth. See, for the Romans, if you couldn't control your tongue, it meant you couldn't control yourself, and that made you unworthy of respect. Simple as that. The contrast here is just night and day. Coriolanus ran his mouth, revealed everything, and got exiled. Now, fast forward 2,000 years, and you have a French king who built an entire empire on the exact opposite idea: reveal absolutely nothing. So let's pivot and look at a true masterclass from Louis XIV, the Sun King. For this guy, silence wasn't just a shield, it was a weapon. Just try to picture the scene at Versailles, right? You've got these nobles and ministers spending days, maybe weeks, preparing their arguments, agonizing over every little detail. They finally get their audience with the king, they lay out these super complex cases, and Louis, he just listens. In complete and total silence, with a face that was just impossible to read. Can you imagine the tension in that room? It must have been absolutely unbearable. And then, that was it. After all that work, all that debate, his entire response was just 3 little words: I shall see. That's it. Then he'd just turn and walk away. He never explained himself. He never gave his reasoning. And then weeks later, his decision would just happen. It would become reality. And that was the absolute genius of his strategy. His silence was a mask. Because nobody ever knew where he really stood, nobody could manipulate him. They couldn't play him. Instead, they were the ones who kept talking, desperately trying to figure him out, trying to win his favor. And in doing so, they revealed all their own weaknesses, all their ambitions. And he just soaked it all up, ready to use it. Okay, so these stories from history are pretty wild. But what makes this strategy so effective? Something that works across centuries? Well, it really boils down to a few core psychological tricks. Keys to power, you could say. So it really comes down to 3 main things. First, you create mystery. Look, people are wired to interpret things. If you give them a blank canvas, they'll start painting on it themselves, and they often imagine something way more profound or impressive than what's actually there. Second, you make other people talk. Humans, we hate awkward silences, right? It makes us nervous, so we rush to fill it, and in that rush, we reveal way more than we mean to. And third, and this one's just common sense really, it's just good old risk management. You can't say something stupid or dangerous if you don't say anything.
And hey, this isn't just for kings and politicians either. I mean, look at artists like Andy Warhol or Marcel Duchamp. Warhol flat out said it. I learned that you actually have more power when you shut up. And Duchamp, he barely said a word about his own art. And what happened? It drove people crazy trying to figure it out. They talked about it endlessly, which only made his work more famous and more valuable. These guys were masters at letting everyone else do the PR for them.
Okay, but here's a really important catch. This is not a one-size-fits-all rule. Like any law of power, you've got to know when to break it. There are definitely times when staying silent is a huge mistake, sometimes even a fatal one. So you have to be smart about this. For example, if you're dealing with your boss or someone higher up, your silence could easily be mistaken for you being clueless or worse, defiant. And, there's the flip side too. Sometimes talking a lot can be the perfect smokescreen. You can come off as this harmless, open book, all while you're hiding what you're really up to. But the biggest danger, the one that shows you just how high the stakes can get, isn't about choosing silence over speech in general. It's about that one moment, uttering a single, totally unnecessary phrase that once it's out there, you can never, ever take back. And that brings us to one last, pretty shocking story. So picture this. It's 1825 in Russia. A rebel leader, a guy named Kondraty Ryliev, is standing on the gallows. He's about to be hanged. The trapdoor swings open, but then something incredible happens. The rope snaps. He survives the fall. Now, back then, an event like this was seen as a sign from heaven, an act of God. It was customary that you'd get a pardon. Your life was spared. So Ryliev, he's probably bruised and shaken, but he's alive. He gets back on his feet. He's been saved. But in that moment of pure relief, he just can't help himself. He shouts out this comment to the crowd, this sarcastic, foolish, and 100% unnecessary crack about how they can't even make a decent rope in Russia. Well, you can bet that comment traveled fast. A messenger rushed it straight to the Tsar, who was literally in the middle of signing the pardon. And when he heard what Ryliev had said, he tore that pardon to shreds. The very next day, they took Ryliev right back to the gallows. And this time, you better believe the rope did not break. A few sarcastic words, and they cost him his life. I mean, that is the ultimate brutal lesson, isn't it? Once the words are out there, you can't take them back. Ever. Ryliev was handed a second chance at life, a miracle, and he tossed it all away for the cheap satisfaction of one single useless sentence. So that leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. We live in this unbelievably noisy world, a world that feels like it rewards talking all of the time. But after hearing all this, where in your life, maybe in a negotiation or a tough conversation, or even just day-to-day chats, where could a little bit of silence actually give you a whole lot more power?